Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost. And we are here to talk more about the science of happiness. And today's topic can be a little bit heavy for you. If you are looking for something lighthearted, it might not be the best one, but it's actually very important to our happiness. And we have the perfect expert to talk to us about moving through chronic neurotic guilt and valuing ongoing existential guilt. Very big topic. At least for me, I don't know what to expect today, but I'm excited to talk to Bob, our guest of the day, about this topic. And by way of introduction, Bob Edelstein, LMFT. MFT is an existential-humanistic psychotherapist with 50 years of experience. He provides individual and couples therapy, as well as consultation, supervision, workshops, and trainings for clinicians and students. He has presented an existential humanistic training group series for over 2 decades. He is a blogger for Psychology Today and has published articles on the existential humanistic perspective, including a chapter entitled Frames, Attitudes, and Skills of an Existential Humanistic Psychotherapist in the Handbook of Humanistic Psychology, 2nd edition. He has presented multiple workshops on existential humanistic psychotherapy, including presenting at both the 2nd and 3rd Existential Psychotherapy World Congresses. Bob is the founder and past president of the Existential Humanistic Northwest Professional Organization. Sorry, Bob, I kind of tripped over some words over there because there's a lot of information about your background. I hope that's okay. I hope I did justice to your short bio, but I think it doesn't cover enough. I'm sure there's so much more to your professional career, especially since you've been working in this field for so long, over 5 decades from the look of it. So I would love to get you to introduce a bit more about yourself to our audience, and especially how you got here. You know, why did you choose to do this work, and what led you here?
Yeah, thank you, Lou. And also, you presented me just fine. And I know to say existential-humanistic is a tricky word to say. So, the way I got started is I'm 73. And I got I grew up in Long Island, New York, in the 50s. And my family, achievement and intellect were highly valued, but my inner experience, my inner feelings, thoughts, etc., they weren't discarded, but they were definitely second place. So my childhood was pretty good because I was smart and achieved a lot. And then when I went to college, what I found was I would go through depressions at certain times during those 4 years in college, and I didn't quite know what they were about. And then, and I was an economics major because my parents thought that would be practical, and I was fairly out of directed, in terms of as compared to having my own mind. And so my senior year in college, I was taking an elective education course, and I read a book called Freedom to Learn by Carl Rogers. And Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow were the two psychologists who really popularized and really brought humanistic psychology into the United States. And basically what Carl Rogers said, what he did primarily was being a psychotherapist, but he applied it to all certain areas of society. So this was applied to education. And he said two things that really blew my mind at that time. I was like 21, 22. And he said that we knew what was best for ourselves. We could be the author of our own lives, which again at that age seemed like quite a novel concept and an exciting one. And he said, in order to take ownership of your life, you need to really know who you are in your inward life, in terms of whatever's going on in the outside world, whatever's going on in relation to others. I am able to move into my thoughts, my feelings, my bodily sensations, images, memories, etc. And from that, I stay with my authenticity. I stay with who I am at that moment. And then I can move that into actualizing in manifesting in the world what I'd like to see happen. So, once I read that, I knew that was my tribe. That's what I wanted to, that's who I wanted to be. That's who I wanted to be in my value system and my way of being. And then eventually and I was actually getting a master's in education. And once I realized then, no, I want to be a therapist. So then I shifted it over and eventually became a therapist and moved on in my career in trajectory of my career.
Yeah. Wow. That is so interesting, especially because, when I was reading your bio, I was kind of going, existential-humanistic psychotherapy. This is my first time hearing that, and obviously it has to come with a story of how you got into this field of work. It's very niche. It sounds like something that we should all learn about, because I'm sure it has to do with our existence and our humanity. So, I'm keen to find out more about that very soon. Before we go into that part of the conversation, though, I would love to get to know you a little bit better through some of your recommendations. I'm sure our audience would appreciate this as well. We have a section called Have You Met Bob? Now, I'm going to ask you a series of questions to get some of your recommendations or just things that are close to your heart. I would love to hear that from you. The first question is my favorite one to ask. What is a book you would recommend?
I would recommend two books: Freedom to Learn by Carl Rogers, who I just mentioned, and The Search for Existential Identity by Jim Buchenthal, who was my mentor. So those books within the psychological framework. I could do a lot of books that are outside of it, but given this podcast, that's what I would say.
Yeah, they sound very interesting. I've never heard of them before, but given the topic of today, I would probably look them up. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry, did I say Freedom to Learn? I meant to say On Becoming a Person by Carl Rogers.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so we've got the correct title. Thank you for that. So we asked for one book, we've got two. Now I'm wondering if it's going to be the same with movie.
It will be.
Okay. What is a movie or the two movies you would recommend then?
And again, I'm doing this within a psychological context. Good Will Hunting and Ordinary People, because those were the best examples of psychotherapy that I've seen in movies, because often psychotherapy could be portrayed pretty poorly in movies. So that's why I picked those two movies.
Yeah, I have seen Good Will Hunting. I saw it very recently, actually, a few weeks ago. It's really good. The other one I haven't seen yet, so I'll put that on my list. Thank you for that. I know that you are our current podcast guest today. I'm wondering if you actually listen to any podcast.
I'm not a big a podcast listener, but the one I put in, I guess is kind of self-serving, but I really like the podcast People. And it's called The Psychologist Podcast. And Gil and Julia Straight are the ones who run it. And they live in Texas.
Yeah. Okay. Very on brand. Thank you for that. Now, I'm not going to be surprised when the next one is on brand as well. Who would be your role model? This could be a famous person or just someone in your circle.
And again, I am on brand in terms of how I thought about this in the context of the podcast. Jim Buchenthal, my mentor. He passed in 2007, but I started studying with him in 1991, and he powerfully, and I was transformed in terms of his influence on me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. We all need good mentors in our lives, and I'm
Yeah.
just really inspired by that. Final question in this part. I know it's probably been a while since you took any course. Maybe you have taken something recently, but what is a course you completed that left a really strong impact on you? Now, I wouldn't be surprised if it's also on brand.
It is. And it's an easy one for me because it has to do with how I met my mentor. Jim Bugenpatel ran a series of what he called the Art of the Psychotherapist series. And it was about 20 people throughout the country, some people from Canada. And it was from 1991 through 1994 or 1995. And it was a week retreat at a retreat center in California. And it was based on a book he wrote called The Art of the Psychotherapist. So, I mean, and what I think is pretty cool is that after 4, it was a conclusion, you know. But however, we bonded so much within our group that we're still meeting annually from that, every year. That's something. And I mean, half the group, we've added new members, and half the group are from the original 90s. And and the other thing I can say on that in terms of my history is I was so moved by what I learned in that series. In 95, 96, I started a group called an Existential-Humanistic Training and Case Consultation Group based on the Art of the Psychotherapist that I did in Portland. And it has shifted in some ways, in ways I've changed, but that I'm still providing it today.
Wonderful. Now, I'm a little curious now because you've been very on brand, and today's topic is about essentially about guilt. But what we're talking about, and what you've been talking about since we started the conversation, has been existential humanistic psychotherapy. To me, this is a very new terminology, and I guess for our audience too, because not everyone is, a specialist or training in this area. So for us who don't know anything about such areas, how would you explain what it is in very simple terms?
Yeah, exactly. So it's really the root of the two words. So the premise is that the only thing this is the existential part. The premise is that the only universal is that we all share the human experience, and we all have the job or the task, if we want to live a fulfilled life, or even to make meaning and purpose, to make authentic meaning and purpose of how we're going to create our lives, and that changes in and over time. And so that's the existential part. The humanistic part is that that each of us are unique individually, and so it's kind of, as a psychotherapist, it means I'm interested in who I'm with and the uniqueness of their lived experience. And I look at they have the best answers for themselves. I'm here to facilitate them discovering that through the therapy.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that will help us a lot in today's context, because your expertise would help us to understand chronic neurotic guilt and ongoing existential guilt. These are two very big words, I would say, first of all. And second of all, they're quite, I would say, tough to navigate, because it's not a lighthearted topic, as I mentioned at the beginning. So we'll need your help to guide us through what it is about and how can we navigate it. But before we do that, let's talk about happiness, because that's what the show is about, right? Happiness, guilt. We'll see the correlation very soon. Let's start with happiness. How do you define happiness for yourself? What's your personal definition?
Yeah, well, first of all, I like the word joy better than happiness, because joy to me, happiness is kind of a static connotation to me. And I look as human beings, we're always in movement, we're always in process. So being static is not a good thing. Being static doesn't make me happy. But so that's one thing. But in terms of, I'll still use the word happiness. What I look at happiness is that it's a place of being where I feel good about who I am and about my life. However, yeah, okay. And I was going to say that, but there's a kind of interesting, I don't look at that the aim is to go directly forward to happiness. I look at the aim is to look at what turns me on in terms of how I get engaged in my life, in terms of how I connect with people and others in my life, in terms of how I'm in service to others in my life, and that happiness or joy is a byproduct of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really great way to connect with life, right? It's like the meaning of our lives, because it's not just us serving ourselves. I really like that you mentioned how you're of service to others, and it's how we connect with life, I guess, because we don't just live by ourselves here in this life. We interact with others. We're in society, or at least in our community where we are, and especially nowadays, because you said you were born in the 50s, I believe. And so, you've seen so much throughout your life, and as you can see now, we live in this world where you and I can talk. Isn't that amazing? Like when you were in your, I don't know, 20s, this probably was not a thing at all. And you're in the US, I'm in Australia, and we can make this conversation happen. So much has changed, and I think it's kind of complicating happiness in a certain way. And with that, people start to sort of stray from the really simple things that bring happiness and joy in life, as you prefer the word joy, like you said earlier. So I wonder, in all your years of not just professional career, but also in your life in general, what do you notice to be some of the biggest misconceptions that people have when it comes to happiness, especially the younger generation?
Well, to add on to what I was saying earlier is like, when I was saying to go for happiness is an illusion in some ways, that basically happiness is fluid. Or I'm going to call happiness, doesn't matter. I like joy, but I'll stick with happiness. So happiness is fluid because we're fluid as human beings. So what will make me happy at one point in my life may end up not being something that doesn't make me happy in another point in my life. So basically, I'm saying the same thing, that the misperception about happiness is that, I have to find what I'm happy and go after it. I mean, one of the things, because it's different what people find happiness in terms of their development, but that one of the things is, a kind of materialistic level of happiness. I'm going to get that big boat, So maybe that does make a person happy. But then they could get to a point in their life where saying, perhaps this isn't enough. What would make me happy now? And then they may go more like, oh yeah, I want to understand what life is about. I'm going to look at, I'm going to study philosophy or spirituality or religion or whatever it is. So it's more of, what am I drawn to engage in, more than, and in that it could be challenging, so it's not a straight line to happiness.
Definitely. That is so true. I think it's a good reminder, because I think when I was younger, I thought, and this came out of the previous podcast recording I was doing today, I was thinking, what, I'll be like so happy when I do more in life, like achieve more, go on big adventures. I'll be happier. I'll feel better. I'll have a better sense of well-being. But now that I'm a little bit older, like not that old, but a little bit older, I think it's not the same anymore. Now I look for moments of peace, moments of joy, where I just enjoy the little things. And I think that's just like, it's a big change for me personally, because I looked at, what I was thinking about before and what I want now. And I'm just like, whoa, where's that person now? And I feel like, what? It's just a part of the growth journey. I'm a different person and I need different things at this particular time and stage in my life. Maybe it will change again very soon. Who knows?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
can
that's,
say, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I look at part of life is we're changing all the time, but that's scary. So that was part of where, where it's easy to say I have to be this way for my life, to keep safe. So it smells like what you're saying about yourself. It feels pretty authentic to me, which is very cool. Or I value a lot. And it's true what you just said. In 10 years from now, maybe there's an adventure you want to take that really turns you on, but it's not because you should take the adventure. It's like, oh, this is what's going to bring me happiness right now. It's okay.
Definitely.
Well, I can give you an example from myself where, like at least in the United States, the life-work balance is a big term, I don't know if it is in Australia. And
it is.
So it is. So, I get frustrated at that because I don't think it should be life-work balance. I think it should be what brings me joy and happiness. So I have the best friend I have. He has a breadth of avocations and hobbies, and he's just really happy about it. He really likes it. And for me, I'm like a one-trick pony. I love what I do, So as long as it gives me great joy, why should I say I have to have all these other interests and avocations and stuff?
Yeah, definitely. That's so true. I think each to their own, right? And I feel like sometimes when it comes to happiness, we can probably forget about the fact that people are so different. And I don't know about others, but for me, like I used to be very judgy when other people are kind of like, they don't go out because I used to be the kind of person that goes out all the time. And now I'm a homebody, so I'm like, I've changed, I've grown, and now I appreciate that. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And I used to be the kind of person that, I didn't know I was a people pleaser until much later on. I said yes to everything, went out with everyone. And now I've started to say no. I've started to, find my balance, and that brings me joy and happiness. And then I find that is totally okay. And previously, I used to not understand why people said no to plans, especially when it comes to like a group of friends. I'm so passionate about getting people together, making sure everyone shows up when it comes to like a group hangout. And if they don't show up, I'll be so sad or upset about it even. But now as I've grown and I've learned to understand this and, have empathy for others and understand that we are different, I know that, sometimes they have other things going on, or this is not their priority, or they might not be in the best headspace to hang out, and that's totally fine. It takes so much time for me to understand that, happiness is so personal. And, when you mention that aspect, I was kind of like, yep, exactly. That is so true. It's an evolution. But, that is interesting because we're now talking about guilt, right? Today, we're talking about guilt, which would probably spark a lot of questions in our audience, because we are talking about happiness and we're talking about guilt, and in our happiness and joy in life, let's say, guilt seems to be this big bad thing in life where, people kind of like try to either avoid or, try to not talk about. So it's kind of like it's ignored most of the time. And before we started the conversation, you mentioned two different things. So chronic neurotic guilt and ongoing existential guilt, which are the two things that we are going to cover today. So I'm guessing that our conversation will go in the direction where you explain both of those aspects. And so to start with, let's define guilt, because I'm sure in that definition, we'll see both of those things that you mentioned. So how would you define guilt?
Well, I could say guilt is a regret of what I've done that I don't feel good about in reflection, whether it's with a friend or a partner where I was insensitive to them in some ways, or if it's something in the world that I didn't pay attention to, that I feel badly about just being a world global citizen. Climate change is one for me that is really important, and also so any rate, and I don't think regret's a bad thing. Regret could go into regret can move into guilt, in that neurotic chronic guilt, which inhibits one's life, or it can move into the direction of ongoing existential guilt, which can expand one's life.
Very interesting. So how are those two things different? Because, you said it's kind of like, it sounds like there's a sweet spot with guilt where, you should have an enough amount in your life. But there are two very different things that you just touched on there. So how would you define them? How would you define chronic neurotic guilt and ongoing existential guilt?
Yeah, well stated. So again, it's how one engages with the guilt. So in chronic neurotic guilt, what often happens is I can't let go of the guilt. I just stay stuck in the guilt. I obsess about it. I feel badly about who I am, but I stay stuck in that badness. I get a critical voice towards myself and become very self-judgmental. So that, and also I can have, this is very self-defined, but I can have these perfectionist expectations of, if it doesn't go exactly how I want it, God, I feel terrible about myself. I don't look at the things that actually were good about whatever happened. So that would be chronic neurotic guilt, which isn't good for one's health in not only emotionally and mentally, and inhibiting one's life in terms of joy and happiness. It's not good for one physically. There's you have that chronic neurotic guilt that stress isn't good for a person. Then the ongoing existential guilt is an acknowledgement that guilt is and should be part of the human condition. Not to overwhelm oneself, but to say I'm part of this world and I am fallible. And so I'm not going to deny it or jump over it. I'm going to use it because I am accepting that I'm fallible, and I am accepting that I'm interconnected with everyone, and the world has ways to go, in terms of where it can evolve in a future, in a good way, that I use it for a sense of urgency in a good way. What do I want to do now to improve myself, to improve my life, but not in a way where I'm feeling badly about myself, or I regret something that I've done, and instead of just being stuck in it, I acknowledge it and say, what can I learn from this? So I don't necessarily need to repeat it another time if the same situation comes up. What amends can I make? I tell my partner, I'm really sorry I did that. I really was insensitive. And then I accept what the partner tells me. They don't have to, it's okay. They can say, that frustrates me. I still really need to be with it for a while. Or, thank you so much. It really touches me, And so I think that leads to more intimacy. When I look at my relation to the world, I'm going to do climate change because that's so important to me. I am aware of, I feel this urgency to do something. And so instead of jumping over it, I look at what can I do to do my part while also expecting my embodied limits. So again, I'm not just beating on myself. And, guilt, this existential guilt is similar to existential anxiety. And neurotic chronic guilt is similar to neurotic anxiety. In other words, anxiety is also part of being. But that anxiety could lead into an urgency that's positive. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more to cover. And you kind of touch on something that I'm also curious about, which is the relationship between guilt and our happiness and joy in life. And you mentioned anxiety, which is, something that takes away that happiness and joy that you're experiencing. So I guess, it's not about avoiding feeling the guilt or thinking that guilt is a bad thing necessarily, but more so how do you manage it in the context of your own happiness and joy? Because you mentioned earlier it can allow you to reflect on your own behavior and be a better person, to your friends, your family, your partner. It could also, lead you to think in a way that reframes your relationship with the world. What can I do and how can I be a better human on this planet while I'm here, right? There's so much more to the feeling of, I feel so guilty for doing this, or I feel bad for doing that, or I feel anxious because I didn't do the right thing, and ruminating on it, because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, and myself included. Sometimes I feel guilty for doing some things, and this is more towards myself, not even others. I'll probably say something for myself to myself like, I feel so stupid,
Yeah.
and guilty for doing something.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that plagued me through. One of the reasons I'm interested, as this is an aspect of the existentialist perspective, is I've had a very strong critical voice through my life, which has softened over the last number of years, which I'm very grateful for. And also I've done work to make that happen. But the and as a premise, one needs to look at the cultural context too. We don't live isolated, and I don't know how it is in Australia, but in the United States, the judgmentalness is an epidemic. You just go. It has been since is a pandemic. It's been through my whole life. I mean, it's not just me, the whole culture, where it becomes right and wrong. And certainly in the United States right now, we're more polarized than maybe we've ever been in my lifetime. But basically, because you're right, I'm wrong, or to yourself, you idiot, you didn't do it this way, that kind of thing. And so basically, to the best of our ability, it's suspending our judgment. And instead of using judgment in a destructive way, even if there's judgment, you use it in a constructive criticism way of, back what I was saying before, how can I learn from this? How can I look at this with a curiosity and openness, a sense of wonder, a sense of awe of what it means to be a human being? A very close friend and colleague, Kirk Schneider from the United States, he's the, I'd say, he's the contemporary spokesperson for Existential-Humanistic psychotherapy to the world in the United States. And he's written a number of books on awe-based consciousness. And that's, to me, what I just said is what he's saying. Like, how do you move away from judgmentalness in that negative, inhibiting way and just stay open to what the world's giving us?
Yeah, that's a really good tip, because I feel like, it's so hard to be kind to ourselves sometimes in this day and age, because I mean, you said in the US it's very polarized, but this is also a human condition where we naturally just sort of gravitate towards blaming ourselves and have these negative self-talks. And I didn't realize it before. I'm just slowly learning about all these things now. But it seems like whenever something bad happens, and whether it be because of what we did or what other people do, we tend to just self-blame. Or talk bad about the situation, so we don't necessarily reframe the guilt. And yesterday I was actually talking to my friend about it, where I went through something tough recently, and I told her, I cannot believe for a really long time I kept saying to myself, I'm so stupid, why did I do that? But then I realized that I needed to reframe that in a way where I say to myself, it's okay that I went through that. I had to go through that and make that mistake so that I wouldn't make the same mistake the next time. And now I've learned to be kinder to myself, and I've learned to, look at behaviors instead of words. I've learned to, just separate the thinking from the doing. And there's a lot more to it. And when I told that to her, she was kind of saying, exactly, that's what I've been learning as well. So it seems like we're all on this learning journey together, right? And my friend, she was saying, I used to have a lot of negative self-talk myself. And now I'm just, reframing it all, and it's changed my life completely. I feel more confident about it, and I'm learning from my mistakes rather than dwelling on it. And I said, that's wonderful. It's still taking me so much time to unpack whatever I'm going through. And I feel like this is something that we can all start practicing. It will bring us closer together as humans, because when we're kinder to ourselves, we are essentially kinder to others. And also, the guilt that we're talking about here is not just about the guilt that we think about when we make mistakes, but also we're critical of others people's mistakes. And it's kind of like we're judging them based on guilt, which is not healthy at all.
Yeah, and I would say I'm right with you, Lou. And I would say if I'm, as a generalization, I think it's usually true. If I'm kind and compassionate towards myself, I'm going to be kinder and compassionate towards others. And in terms of happiness, if I'm kind and compassionate towards myself, that makes me happy. And if I'm kind and compassionate to others, that makes me happy. Versus the other way, I'm in my isolated space and beating on myself and distant from others. So, and there was something else you said in that. Oh, yeah. And there's another thing. Sometimes what can happen, like you say, whatever it was, oh, how could I do that? What a stupid thing I did, But making amends can happen. So I'm aware of it. And I had like sometimes through not having a personal touch yet, email and stuff like that, So I had a colleague recently where what she wrote, I really took affront with. It was, I felt very personal about it. Felt hurt or attacked. And then I talked it over with her, and we both saw that, oh, I could have done it this way. I could have done it this way. And then we got closer. And so to me, that's the type of making amends. Like, I'm just not running from it. It's a way I can also use it for intimacy. If I'm open, like I'm open to myself of understanding, being compassionate to what was going on, I can also be open and compassionate if it's an internal, interpersonal argument or challenge. So I think you're right on. Can I say one other thing about what we just finished off is about making amends, to be more clear and using that example. So with my colleague and I, as we understood each other and saw the assumptions we were making, then we genuinely apologized to each other.
Yeah.
So rather than, So rather than making it that I made a mistake or that was stupid, it would be like, anything can be remedied if I'm kind to myself.
Beautiful.
And willing to work it out with the other.
Yeah. So I think what you just touched on there is exactly how we can start to practice self-compassion and alleviate the guilt through reframing the self-talk, reframing how we see the guilt in the first place. Because I think, dwelling on guilt can be really detrimental to, not just ourselves, but the relationship we have with others. Because, when we are feeling guilty, we can unknowingly sort of display behaviors where it's kind of negative, or we might be just fixated on something where we could have focused on the solution, right? And like you were saying, we can apologize, we can make amends. We just need to be conscious of that, because it's really easy to get sucked into the whole, like I did a bad thing and there's nothing I can do about it. No, not really. Like if you did a bad thing, you can always look at what went wrong, and if you need to apologize to someone, you can, and make things better. But I also notice, like in life, there are a lot of times, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationship, where the guilt is not even acknowledged. So this is a whole different area in itself, where someone, a person A wrongs person B, and they don't even know what they did. And so it could go one or two way. They could have a conversation about it and they work it out, or they don't ever talk about it at all, and it's just kind of swept under the rug, and it could damage the relationship slowly over time or immediately at that point. And in fact, I heard this story from one of my friends, where she said she was going to one of her best friend's birthday parties, and immediately after that birthday party, she got blocked with no explanation, let's say. And so I was kind of like trying to understand, because they were best friends, and the friendship just ended with no explanation whatsoever. So she didn't even know what she did wrong. And in this scenario, it's quite interesting when you think about it, because it could be, because this person, the person I was talking to, had no idea what she did. And it could be because of the other person's interpretation and what they were going through. Or she could have done something that was inherently wrong, and she didn't acknowledge that at all. So there's so much that could go on when it comes to interpersonal relationship, and the guilt cannot be remedied at all. And that's where it gets really tricky, because I see a lot of relationships go downhill this way.
Yeah, well, to me, a key word in that is responsibility. We don't have control over how the other is going to respond to us. And I take responsibility in your friend's case. I didn't know what happened. That I would look at it, that was important is that she takes responsibility in terms of, well, maybe I did something that offended her, but I'm not going to move into this neuronic chronic guilt in terms of just blaming myself. Well, I'm not sure what I did, but I want to find out. And then I'll move it to kind of, the existential guilt, and have the courage to ask her friend and say, what did I do so I can remedy it, or tell you what's going on with me, So again, it's actually courage to be intimate. But she can't control her friend. I mean, that's, so the aim of, would be, that's why I say happiness isn't the goal. It's feeling good about who you are and what you've done is the goal. It's having a sense of well-being, because I'm disappointed, I'm sad, but I feel good. And, so that's not happiness or joy, but it's really a sense of well-being that I did what I could.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also about setting boundaries and, the self-care that you set, because as you mentioned, it could be, it could be something that you can actively work on, or it's just something you have to sort of acknowledge and radically accept. It's like new terminology that I've been using a lot in my days. I think it's not about preventing guilt per se, but it's the setting boundaries and the self-care in a way where we acknowledge the guilt that we do have, because as you said earlier, it could be either chronic neurotic guilt, or it could be ongoing existential guilt. And as humans, we will never be in a state where we are not guilty of anything whatsoever, because we make mistakes as humans, right? I think apart from narcissists, we all know that we make mistakes, and perhaps there might be some other exceptions that you can share more with us. But overall, we all need to set healthy boundaries, and we have to prioritize self-care in certain ways, so we don't get sucked into the cycle of, I'm just a bad person, I made mistakes, this is not going to be okay, and there's nothing I can do. And you already told us a few strategies as to how to reframe it, but what about some of the strategies to set boundaries and prioritize self-care that we might have not covered yet?
Okay. So I can respond to that in a few different ways. Mm-hmm. That one of the things, if you tend to go through chronic neurotic guilt, a person could not even know what a boundary is, or what they think is a good boundary. They're still really giving themselves up, and too much to the other person rather than having a balance, or to a group or whatever it is. So one term for that is that dealing with codependency. That would be one definition of it. Giving up who you are to another human being, even if the other human being isn't requiring that. And even if they are requiring that, then that's a boundary to say, no, I'm not going to do it. So one of the ways to sometimes I think you need other people to help in that is one way, because and that's why there's 12-step meetings called Codependency Anonymous. And one of the values of that is you can get feedback in checking out your boundaries, or maybe just group therapy and checking out, getting feedback from other people. seeing you're not alone in terms of other people also deal with that confusion of boundaries and self-care. And even if you don't do that, hopefully to be able to check with trusted friends or a partner or whoever it is, someone that you don't feel you're being codependent to, people that you trust, and get, is this like, what do you think of this boundary? Or what do you think of this way of doing self-care, you know? So you're taking in feedback from others. I would say also, excuse me, as you develop a better sense of self, then it's easier to go inward. It's easier to go inward and say, how do I feel about where my boundaries are at right now, where my self-care is at? And then you can get an inner sense of, oh, you know, I'm right. Well, usually if you're asking a question, there's some kind of problem. But one, you could get a resonance of, oh, yeah, I'm doing just great. I'm being, you know. But then you could say, there can be a thing of, oh, brother, I need someone to drive my kids somewhere or whatever. I can't do it. I could do it every day, but then I'm not taking care of myself. I need my partner to do that or whatever. And so then there's a resonance to that. I'm trusting my intuition. But until you get to that sense of self, that a level of self-esteem, it can be harder to do that.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite tricky because there's a lot to navigate, not just the, you know, the sense of, oh yeah, this is all about me and getting over how I'm feeling, but it's also dependent on other people around us, right? Because sometimes the guilt can be triggered by gaslighting. Now, I mentioned this because there are some caveats there. You know, sometimes you feel guilty not because of what you did, but because, you know, these things happen, you know, gaslighting happen, miscommunication happen, misunderstanding happens. And so I think what I've learned so far, and I wonder what your take is actually forgiving ourselves. That's the most important thing that I think we can focus on, because obviously guilt, we're talking about guilt here in the context of the human condition. We're talking about ourselves first and foremost, but we also know that we're dealing with the guilt of others from time to time when we are the one who is being wronged. But sometimes it's really funny when, you know, gaslighting happened and you're kind of like, was I wrong? What is going on? And I find it so hard to forgive myself when that happens, because in my head I'm like, oh, I could have done more, you know, like maybe there's something that I did not do right, or maybe there's something that I sort of forget to look at. And so it all comes back to forgiving ourselves, especially when something has a really huge impact on you and it's kind of like it's always on your mind. It's even harder and even more important to learn to forgive yourself and letting go of that past guilt, because it can haunt you for a very long time, right? So yeah,
Right.
how can we do that? It's quite tricky.
Yeah. Well, I'll use that word again, engaging with your guilt in a few different ways. That one is that like someone gaslights you, and instead of to do your best in Canada, instead of just being reactive to it and moving to I'm a terrible human being, to the best of your ability, give it a little bit of space and give it some times of, well, you know, let me kind of explore my self-criticalness and all that. And in that, you could, to the best of your ability, what I've been talking about, suspend your judgment or feel the guilt, experience the guilt, but that being aware of how real is this, you know, and then what come up might be some anger towards the other person. Like, how dare you just throw your stuff on me? Or how dare you were so ungentle and uncompassionate, you know, even if there's some truth to what the person says. And so then you're in touch with that feeling. Then you can move into, I'm making this up, some sadness of, oh yeah, that's happened too much in my life. Maybe some tears will come out of that. Or a determination, damn, I'm going to do my best not to fall into that gaslighting with people like I can have a tendency to do. Then it can move into you imagining you holding yourself, like another part of yourself, just, you know, a very loving, compassionate part of you saying you're okay to that wounded part of yourself. Or, and then maybe come into, yeah, I'm going to keep my distance from that person, But at some point, it may also move into, well, look at what their wound is, that they have to do that. So I can actually feel compassion and love towards that person. But you don't want to do that too quickly, because then that's just that's not genuine forgiveness. It's jumping over your forgiveness. Oh, I have to forgive the other person, then it's going to be okay.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's quite hard, to navigate, because it's easier said than done, to be honest. Like if we can easily forgive ourselves, I believe we would be in a much better society by now, because I feel like we're all sort of walking around carrying guilt from, past experiences. And that's kind of how we are interacting with others. Because I feel like for me, sometimes that's how I have noticed my behavior. It's not that I don't want to forgive myself for something that I did before, but it's just kind of, it's a process, right? You kind of saying like, I don't remember the exact word you were using, but kind of like interact with that guilt and, kind of sit with it in a way. I feel like it's challenging in the sense that you think in your mind that, okay, I've forgiven myself. I have moved past it. And then one day out of nowhere, it comes back. It's subconsciously comes back and resurfaces. And it's just something that we probably don't talk about very often, because it's quite heavy. When you think about it, like who would sit down and talk about guilt? Not very many, I don't think many people would actually do that over the dinner table or over a hangout. And no one would be like, let's talk about the guilt that you're still dealing with from your past experiences from years ago. So yeah, I guess it's kind of like it's kind of a challenge, because I find that the last thing that I want to touch on is authenticity in life. And this is because when we are carrying ourselves in the world and interacting with others, like me interacting with you right now, I might, for example, subconsciously, unknowingly seem really apologetic out of nowhere. Oh, I'm so sorry I mentioned that. Or, and this happens in conversations that I've noticed with my friend, where I just kind of like, there's some sort of guilt out of nowhere that just bubbles up in the conversation. And I feel so guilty. And then later on, I reflect on the conversation. I was like, why was I so guilty talking to them about my feelings? And then I'm like, oh, maybe I haven't forgiven myself for something that I went through years ago, where I was gaslighted, or where, I felt like I was oversharing or something like that. So that is my way of sharing an example of living with authenticity, because sometimes you want to talk about certain things, right? That's how you bring authenticity to the table. But then you kind of stop yourself because of guilt, or you don't do certain things that would be good because you have that certain level of that guilt that lingers. I don't know. It could be chronic guilt. It could be existential guilt. It could be a neurotic guilt. It could be either. But yeah, I think there's a really, I think a really huge challenge for us in our society nowadays to actually embrace authenticity when we try to achieve these things. Right? We are moving through chronic neurotic guilt, and we are valuing ongoing existential guilt. These are both tough things to achieve. So how would you recommend us, to go through that with authenticity?
Yeah. Great question. First of all, I'm going to repeat what I said before. In the United States, it sounds like Australia, because I don't think this is a universal. It doesn't have to be, but we have so much judgment that we're coming from that in the first place. It's so easy to move into guilt or denial of guilt. How that then, that being aware of it is important, and you can do meditation, you can do journaling, you can, be able to spend some time with yourself. And so guilt comes up, and you can write about it or meditate on it and see what comes up. You can also, with other because that can help you get into a deeper part of your authenticity. Because in some ways you cannot not be authentic. It's going to deeper levels of authenticity. Who I am is who I am. But there's a difference between where I'm putting on an image and I really don't know who I am below the image, or I'm just so worried about how people think of me. I don't get below that. So to me, it's getting to that deep level of authenticity. And the way I'm going to be theoretical now. Hopefully it'll be understandable. So in an existential humanistic therapeutic modality, because now this is, you can talk to a close friend also to talk about your guilt, or you can talk about it to a therapist. So in an existential humanistic therapeutic modality, the belief is that we all create our identities. That it's not, again, this is your identity, end of story. It's back also what I say, what's universal is we share the human experience, but how we make meaning of it and how we define who we are is a reflection of our life experiences and how we apply and interpret those life experiences. So I have an identity, and then I'm being in the present moment with my therapist or with your friend or with you doing journaling or whatever. And all of a sudden this guilt comes up about, oh yeah, what is that about? And then all of a sudden in the container with the therapist, or again, in other ways, is that you're able to explore and investigate that. And then all of a sudden when you see, oh yeah, that was, certainly it can be a family of origin stuff. So, oh yeah, mom just kept on doing that, and yeah, I moved into guilt because not she loved me, but that's how her pain was or whatever. And then I brought it hook, line, and sinker. So then that's a way to forgive yourself and forgive your mom. And then all of a sudden, when you do that, guilt doesn't take up as much as your identity, and your identity loosens some in that aspect. You're able to experience more happiness because there's less guilt. But in terms of what you're saying, I don't believe these big themes, I call them existential themes, but whatever, ever disappear completely. Because again, we're human. So one is, as I said, the healthy existential guilt's always going to be there anyway, because it's just a way to respond to, I think, what we should feel guilty about. And again, make amends, etc.
Definitely.
And we're just going to move into the world in a different way. But in terms of that, still the neurotic chronic guilt, it's not like, okay, it's never going to be again. But the difference is that I catch the neurotic chronic guilt sooner and let it go quicker. So basically, what I'm looking at is, I look at presence and authenticity intertwined. And so what I mean by presence is my aim and intention as a therapist and as a person, as a human being, is to be as accessible to my inner life as I can, and to be expressive of it to the other, again, therapist, friend, etc. And in doing that, I support the person who I'm talking to be more authentic, to discover, because of the openness in that talking and in inward searching, all of a sudden I'm aware more of discovering aspects of myself I didn't know, or I become more conscious of. So then all of a sudden that authenticity leads then to a fuller human life and self-fulfillment. The humanistic view is that if I peel back the protections of, there's a certain safety in this case, feeling guilty, because it's what we've learned. As a kid especially, you don't have that empowerment to, as an adult you can shift. As a kid, it's tougher. And so, okay, this is what I need to be safe. I'm dependent on my parents for survival. And so then all of a sudden I go through unconscious in my life. But then as an adult, opening up to discovering these parts that have been reified, that have been, this is just how it is, releases something that supports my happiness. So by peeling back the protections and moving through the wounds, then the humanistic belief is I naturally move towards health and happiness, that human beings basically are good, altruistic, etc.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of information there that can be like quite philosophical in a way, but also, requires a lot of self-work from the sound of it, because all of the talks that we've been doing so far is, all come back to how we interact with ourselves and how we see guilt and how we see our self-values in the first place. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's just something that, again, as I said, group of friends, I believe, have sat down and said, hey, let's talk about the guilt that we've gone through and, how we deal with that. And, let's talk about it. I don't think so. So hopefully this podcast episode starts a conversation somewhere. It can be a small chat about it, and can inspire others in certain ways to look at how they are moving through all of these challenges when it comes to guilt. And the two different kinds of guilt we've talked about today. But I think it's so important to look at it in a healthy balance, with perspective. Yeah, with perspective, you don't want to get stuck in a state where it's all, what, guilt is bad. I've done a bad thing. You kind of want to grow from it. And I think that's the beautiful thing about guilt that I've realized after this conversation. It's not all bad. It's just how we see it.
Yeah. And I would say, like you say, well, you just don't sit around in a group and talk about guilt. So one of my responses to say is, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We don't do that enough.
Yeah, and that could be in a group of usually it'll be close friends or maybe one-on-one with a friend, of course, in therapy. And, you can talk about guilt, anxiety, whatever. It's a way to get closer. And in my opinion, it's not about it being one-sided. You can also, and should, even I like the word should, but in terms of balance, I like that word, talk about your joy and your, all the things that really feel great too. So then, and it doesn't take away that sometimes you just have fun and you don't have to talk about that, but to look at having the intention to include that as part of your life, again, whether it's with a friend, a partner, a group of friends, a therapist, group therapy, individual therapy. So
totally. Absolutely. Now, I know we've covered a lot of theory and also practical application of how people can move through this, chronic neurotic guilt, and also valuing the ongoing existential guilt. But we have the next section, which is all about practice and habit. And even though you've recommended a few things, I know it can be kind of like overwhelming to look at all the different things people can try. So how about we get you to recommend one thing that our audience can start practicing today, maybe something small, a baby step that they can, start incorporating into their daily lives, that would help them to achieve these things that we've just discussed.
Okay. I would say to start out with treating yourself, have the intention to treat yourself with unconditional love, which means basically saying, like an affirmation, saying, I love and accept who I am, exactly who I am, which doesn't mean I don't want to change it, but I'm starting out with loving and accepting who I am. And ironically, paradoxically, when I do that, since we're always in movement and process, there's permission to change the way you are in ways you want to be. When you resist and criticize yourself, you actually stay more stuck with that way of being that you don't like. Was that, did you get that, or no? Was that too?
No, totally. I think yes. In my mind, I was just kind of thinking, when people hear unconditional love, they might go, oh, that's cheesy. But I think, no, it's not. It's just that it's a matter of perception, right? Because all things that are good and well in this world comes from humans that have self-love, and I don't think we can hate ourselves into a better world. No. So
roll on, right on. And you're absolutely right. This isn't easy. In fact, by doing the unconditional love, you may have that part of yourself that you've learned to hate yourself then come up, but that but to develop that you love and accept yourself in whatever way you do it, just as you are in this moment. And again, can lead to change. The other way doesn't lead to change. It leads to stuckness.
Yeah, definitely.
I hold myself.
So true. Well, thank you so much for that. I think we can continue on this topic so much more. But I would very much love to see people start to talk about this more. Like you said, whether in therapy or in discussion with friends in one-on-one or in group discussion, it'll be great to start an evolution or a revolution, let's say, in the way that we see guilt. and not run away from it, but rather, deal with it in a healthy way. So before we close this podcast episode, we have open mic, which is a section where we invite you to talk about anything that you are passionate about. It does not necessarily have to be about the topic of the day, but I know you're very on brand. I wouldn't be surprised if you continue sharing a bit more about it. So the floor is yours. Go for it, Bob.
Yeah, it's true. I am passionate about, as I've been saying through this, about the existentialist perspective. To me, it's more than a therapeutic modality. It's a way, it's a value system and a way of being. And so I can share where the passion with me is in these days. One big thing is I founded in 2010 an organization called Existential-Humanistic Northwest Professional Organization, which is ehnwpdx.org. And I started it to, since I look at it, my passion is to make the world a better place. And for me, because we can make the world a better place in all sorts of ways, but for me, this is my path to attempt to make the world a better place. And so that's what the organization is about. And our vision statement is EHNW, which is Existential Humanistic Northwest, is here to impact the world through a passion for and commitment to existential humanistic values of authenticity, integrity, responsibility, inclusion, interconnectedness, and awe. And so I love those. Those are great values to me to aspire to. And then to move it into application, we have an annual workshop or conference in the fall. And we have every other month we have a lunch and learn on some topic that's related to the EH perspective. We have 4 salons a year: a professional salon, student salon, case consultation salon, and I can't think of the other one right now. A reading salon. And what's great about this, because it's the salons aren't, but the lunch and learns and the annual workshop, and we also have this year we had our first seminar. But all the outside of the lunch and learns, everything else is hybrid. So we've had people all over the world join us in the different activities. So, at any rate, I want to share that, because in case your viewers are interested, they can check out the website and also connect with me if they want to know more. And I enjoy. I have a love-hate relationship with it. I write for a Psychology Today blog every quarter, and I enjoy doing that. I've been doing it for 10, 11, 12 years. And so it's nice to have a body of work in that. And I know it's how the KPI Institute found me, by reading my a blog I did a year ago or something, or on existential guilt. Those are my passions these days. I mean, now those are the application of my passions these days. And it was fun. And I love just to see that there's people all over the world attempting to make this perspective to inform people. The first existential psychotherapy World Congress was in London in 2015, and 2019 it was in Buenos Aires, and in May of this past year it was in Athens. So the last two, it was wonderful to connect with people all over the world, and I made presentations to each of those two. So that sounds very rewarding, and I look forward to the next one is in Colorado in the United States in 2026. So I'm looking forward to that. Although I'm disappointed, because then I can't, fly to a different part of the world.
I'm sure the next one after that should be in another part of the world. You can fly there.
It should be in Australia. That's what I say.
Yeah. It should be here. I wanna join that. That sounds interesting.
I'm somebody with 4 people from Australia that were 2 of them were in Buenos Aires, and they were again in Athens with 2 other people from Australia, and they made presentations both times. So I got close with them. So I hope they lobby to have it in Australia.
Yeah, yes, please. That'll be great. Well, thank you so much, Bob.
Then we'll need to meet.
Yes, exactly. We will. We'll have to, exchange contact details, and we'll be like, okay, where do we meet? This cafe over there. Continue the conversation about guilt. Where do we leave off? I'm gonna go talk about it. Yeah, that sounds like a dream. Sounds great to me. I would love to do that.
Of course.
But yeah, again, it was great that we could make this happen, from 2 different sides of the world. This is really cool. I still find it incredible that we can do this. And so for our audience that wanted to find out about you, you mentioned your website and your email, where they could connect with you. So what is your website and what is your email address where they can reach out to you?
Yeah, it's the website is bobedelstein.com. That's EDELSTEIN. And my email is bob@bobedelstein.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here today. I know it's not an easy topic to talk about, but I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. It could be heavy, but it could also be enlightening. And I find that I enjoy the enlightening part of it more. So thank you for being here and sharing your expertise with us. And I hope you had a great time.
Yeah, thank you, Lou. I did have a great time. And you're a wonderful interviewer.
Thank you. You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.